Hi class, let's get started with our discussion on the digestive system. During today's presentation, we are going to focus on both the structures of the digestive system and the functions of those structures. So let's first start off with an overview of digestion. What are the main processes involved with digestion? We can break the digestive process up into several different steps. One is ingestion. First, you need to put the food in your mouth or in your body. In almost every situation, unless somebody is having a food tube inserted, all that ingestion is going to take via the mouth. Next is digestion, and there's two kinds of digestion. There's mechanical and there's chemical digestion. In both of those situations, you break the food down into smaller pieces. You start with a big piece of food and you break it into smaller pieces. Most mechanical digestion is going to involve the chewing of your teeth, the cutting and tearing and physically breaking apart the food. Chemical digestion is going to primarily rely on digestive enzymes to break apart the food at a molecular level. And finally, we are also going to have movement. We need to take this food and move it one direction through the digestive tract, or the gastrointestinal, GI standing for gastrointestinal tract. And it's important to have the food move one direction through the gastrointestinal tract. Occasionally it will move backwards. That's usually known as vomiting, and that's typically not very pleasant. We also have absorption. Absorption takes place after digestion. After we have broken down the food into the subunits, those subunits are going to be moved across the gastrointestinal tract, the wall that lines that tract, and it will be absorbed into the bloodstream or the lymphatic fluid to be delivered to the cells of the body. And then finally, there's elimination. The stuff that we cannot digest needs to be removed from the body. So this elimination involves going to the bathroom. Number 2, removing that undigestible food product from the body. As we look at the digestive tract, our GI, or gastrointestinal tract, will have 4 primary layers. Starting on the innermost layer, we have the mucosa. This innermost layer is going to be directly against the lumen, or the hollow space inside of the digestive tract, and it's going to have lots of mucus, hence its name being a mucosa. And this mucus serves to lubricate and protect the lining of the GI tract, and there's also going to be some digestive enzymes associated with the mucosal layer as well. Directly beneath the mucosal layer, we have the submucosa. Our submucosa, if we look right in this figure, the mucosal layer is the innermost layer. And then we have the submucosa, which is represented as kind of this bright pink layer. And then that submucosa will be very rich in blood vessels and supplies the nutrients needed that the mucosa needs to make its mucus. Something else that's present in high concentrations of the submucosa is nerves. There's lots of innervation or nerve endings that control the GI tract. And then we have the muscularis, and there's 2 layers of muscularis. One band wraps around the circumference of the GI tract, and that can pinch off segments of the GI tract. The other layer of the muscularis goes lengthwise with the GI tract and helps to push food one direction through the GI tract. And then on the very outside, we have the serosa. This serosa is the outer layer of the GI tract and serves to anchor the GI tract into the peritoneum. The peritoneum is going to be the double-layered membrane that is going to encapsulate the abdominal pelvic cavity. Now, as we look at these organs in the digestive tract, we have primary digestive tract organs and accessory organs. On the left side of the screen, we have accessory organs. On the right side of the screen, we have digestive tract organs. Simply put, accessory organs do not have food traveling through them. Instead, the accessory organs make secretions that aid in digestion. Digestive tract organs do have food traveling through them. And we start with the mouth. From the mouth, food goes to the pharynx. From the pharynx to the esophagus. From the esophagus to the stomach. From the stomach to the small intestine. From there to the large intestine. And from the large intestine to the rectum, and then anus. Our accessory organs include the salivary glands of the mouth, the liver and gallbladder, and then the pancreas. Our pathway that food travels, as I just reiterated on the previous slide, is that food will enter our mouth, go through the pharynx or the back of the throat, travel down through the esophagus, and be temporarily stored in the stomach. Afterwards, it will move through the small intestine, where lots of absorption of nutrients takes place. Then it will travel to the large intestine, where we remove excess water from the food, or reclaim water from the food. before it is stored in the rectum, and as the rectum stretches out, eventually our defecation reflex is triggered and the feces is pushed out through the anus. So, class, concept checked. Which of the following, or which step during the digestive process involves broken down nutrients being transferred into the bloodstream or the lymphatic system? Is it ingestion, digestion, absorption, or elimination? You can go ahead and rewind the video, or you can pause it and check the textbook, or check your PowerPoint slides. Go ahead and get me an answer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The correct answer is C, absorption. That is when we take digested nutrients and put them into the bloodstream, particularly if it's a carbohydrate, a protein, or nucleic acid, or if it's a lipid, we're going to absorb it into the lymphatic system. Moving on to section 9.2, we'll start up with the upper digestive tract, and we will move or begin our discussion with the mouth. There are 3 primary pairs of salivary glands in the mouth. And when I say pairs, I mean that there's 2 of each. All of these and since there's 3 pairs, there's 6 total salivary glands. All of these salivary glands are going to secrete saliva, and within the saliva there's a special digestive enzyme known as salivary amylase. Salivary amylase is a specific kind of enzyme present in the saliva that focuses on digesting carbohydrates in the mouth. This leads to a classic experiment where you would take just a plain saltine cracker, shove it in your mouth, and let it sit there for 5 or 10 minutes, and it actually starts to taste sweet because your salivary amylase turns the complex carbs in your mouth into simple carbs. In the back of your mouth, you have tonsils. These tonsils are known as secondary lymphoid or lymphatic tissues, and they aid us with fighting diseases. Now, we do not need to have tonsils in order to have a functioning immune system, but having tonsils, generally speaking, is better than not having tonsils. Our mouth, our oral cavity, is going to have some teeth. We use our teeth to grind and slice our food as part of our mechanical breakdown or mechanical digestive process. Within our mouth, we also have a tongue, and this tongue is going to be covered with taste buds. These taste buds allow us to sample our food products and determine whether or not they are suitable for ingestion or swallowing or bringing into our bodies. Our tongue also aids us with mechanical digestion, as it's going to move food around within our oral cavity and rotate the food so that our teeth can have an opportunity to mechanically break down all of the food in our mouth. Once the food has been chopped up into little pieces by our teeth, mixed with saliva, and rolled around by our tongue, we get a big blob of chewed up food. And this big blob of chewed up food is known as a bolus. Once we form that bolus, we can move it towards the back of our mouth and swallow it. And it will travel to the pharynx and through the pharynx. So if we look at a typical mouth here, we can see that there's teeth. And on the superior aspect or top of the mouth, we have the hard palate, followed by the soft palate. Dangling in the back, we have the uvula. We have more teeth on the lower jaw. And we also, if we look at the tongue, can see that there are small openings on the underside of the tongue. These small openings allow for saliva to be secreted into the mouth. And there are swellings on the lateral margins of the back of the throat, or the lateral margins of the pharynx. Those are known as tonsils. Now, if we look at our teeth, in a typical adult, there are going to be 32 total teeth. Young children have smaller mouths, so they don't have enough room to have 32 teeth. In their smaller mouth, they're going to have 20 teeth, 20 baby teeth. And since these baby teeth fall out of the mouth, they are called deciduous teeth, because just like a deciduous tree has its leaves fall off in the winter, a young child will have their deciduous teeth fall out as they are growing up. We use these teeth for the mechanical breakdown of food, and the different shapes of the teeth are going to aid with a different kind of mechanical breakdown process, from slicing to tearing to grinding, depending on if we're looking at the incisors, the canines, or the molars. Each tooth is going to have a crown and a root. The crown is the part of the tooth that's above the surface, which we can see in this diagram over here, and the root is the part that is below the surface. On the surface of a roof, we're going to have enamel. Enamel is a very hard mineral produced in our body that produces the white part of our teeth. Deep to the enamel, we have a pulp-like substance known as dentin. And this dentin is a soft tissue inside of our tooth. Within the inner pulp of our, or inner area of our tooth, we have a pulp cavity. This pulp cavity is the living part of our tooth. It is going to contain blood vessels and will contain nerves. When somebody has a sore tooth, it's the nerve in their pulp cavity, these nerves within their pulp cavity, that is going to be experiencing the pain. If somebody has a cavity, also known as a dental carie, they are going to have a hole in their tooth, and that hole in their tooth is going to be made by acids that are produced by bacteria. As these bacteria metabolize sugars and make acids, they can eat holes in our teeth. And if we can limit our simple sugar intake and also brush our teeth, we can limit the metabolic activity of these bacteria and limit the amount of tooth decay that occurs. Some other structures that are worth highlighting are periodontal ligaments. We have many periodontal ligaments that help to anchor our tooth in place. And we also are going to have the gum or gingiva in between our teeth. If we look at the back of our throat, we can see the pharynx. Our pharynx is an area that both food and air can travel through. And most patients will just call that their throat. And there are three kinds of pharynxes, or three areas. We'll talk about this in more in-depth when we get to the respiratory system, where we differentiate the oropharynx, the nasopharynx, and the laryngopharynx from each other. After we make our bolus in our mouth, we'll swallow it, and it'll travel through our pharynx to the esophagus. The esophagus is a long, muscular tube that this food will travel through as it's being carried to the stomach. And once we get that food into the esophagus, we begin peristalsis, where we have this rhythmic one-way motion as the food is traveling through our digestive tract. As we're swallowing our food, there's going to be multiple phases that we travel through as we take this food from our mouth to the pharynx and the esophagus. First, we have the voluntary phase. This is when we choose to swallow something. During this voluntary phase, we are going to send the bolus of food from the mouth to the back of the tongue into the pharynx. And because it's called the voluntary phase, intuitively you probably guessed that it is a voluntary act. You choose to do this. But then we are going to have our involuntary phase. Once that food gets to the pharynx, we're going to have our reflexes take over. And part of the swallowing reflex is going to involve a special fold of tissue known as the epiglottis, folding back to cover up the voice box or to cover up the larynx. This epiglottis keeps us from choking on our food when we swallow it. Occasionally, when you drink a beverage, it'll go down the wrong tube or the wrong pipe. And when that happens, it's because the epiglottis did not fold back like it was supposed to. When the epiglottis does fold back like it's supposed to, food will be directed into our esophagus. Once that food gets into the esophagus, we'll have a rhythmic one-way contraction called peristalsis that will move the food towards the stomach and through our digestive tract. Here we can see in this diagram the voluntary phase where we take the bolus and move it back to the pharynx. The involuntary phase is going to involve this flap for the esophagus folding down and covering up the opening to the larynx or the voice box. And then the bolus will continue posterior down to the esophagus. And once that bolus of food gets into the esophagus, we'll have the esophagus pinch off and then push the food one direction down through the esophagus into the stomach. This is one of the reasons why when you swallow food when you're lying down, swallow food when you're standing, swallow food when you're sitting, or if you swallow something while you're hanging upside down, that food is still always going to make it into your stomach. Occasionally, you'll find patients that are experiencing heartburn. Heartburn, generally speaking, is a phenomenon that occurs when acid from the stomach makes its way into the esophagus. This is known as acid reflux, the stomach acid flowing backwards. And then when that stomach makes it into the esophagus, there's a burning sensation associated with it because the stomach acid is starting to digest the esophagus. If somebody has heartburn on a regular basis, that's known as chronic heartburn, and that can be referred to as gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GERD. Sometimes it's just referred to in brief as acid reflux. There are several things that you can do as an individual, or you can advise your patients to do, to help reduce the amount of heartburn. One of which is do not overeat. If there's too much food in the stomach, it's easier for the stomach to be overfilled and food to flow backwards out of the stomach. So eat small meals throughout the day as opposed to 3 large meals in the day. Also, fatty foods cause the food to stay in the stomach for a longer period of time. And there's pros and cons to this. If you eat fatty food, you're going to feel full, or a sensation of satiation. You'll feel full longer. But the downside of eating fatty food is that food hangs out in the stomach for a longer period of time, which means that you're more likely to have the food flow backwards and cause acid reflux or heartburn. And then finally, light exercise helps to move the food through the digestive tract. That light exercise will help prevent blockages and prevent constipation and minimize the amount of heartburn. So, class, concept check. Which of the following is not a way to reduce heartburn? We have light exercise, drinking beer, eat small meals, and avoiding high-fat food. Go ahead and rewind the video, check your PowerPoint slides, or you can check your text. Pause it and get me an answer right now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The correct answer is B, drinking beer. Drinking beer does not reduce heartburn, but like light exercise, eating small meals, and avoiding high-fat food all help to reduce heartburn. Moving on, we have the stomach. The stomach is a storage organ and digestion organ within our GI, gastrointestinal tract. So we'll store food in our stomach, and we're also going to begin protein digestion in our stomach as well. Once that bolus of food has left the mouth and enters the stomach, we're going to rename the bolus chyme. Chyme is essentially vomit that's still in the stomach and intestine. So once the food gets to our stomach, we rename the chewed up food chyme. And that chyme will be moved into the next structure, the small intestine. The stomach has a thick wall with multiple layers to it and a J shape associated with it. The muscular layers of the stomach are threefold. There's 3 different muscular layers of the stomach that are all oriented in different directions to help the stomach churn and effectively mix the food in its hollow cavity within its lumen. The mucosal layer of the stomach is going to have many, many folds called rugae, and as the stomach is expanding, those folds, those rugae, are going to be stretched out and allow the stomach to expand. Within the rugae, there are some gastric pits or stomach pits, and those stomach pits have stomach glands or gastric glands. So if you haven't guessed by now, gastric is a technical term for stomach. So when we refer to the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract, that literally means the stomach intestine tube. So within the gastric pits, we have gastric glands that make gastric juice. Within the stomach pits, we have stomach glands that make stomach juice. One of the ingredients within gastric juice is called pepsin. Pepsin specifically is an enzyme. It's an enzyme that's been known for a very long time because it has that IN ending. So that tells us that it's been identified very early on. And what does pepsin do? Pepsin is specifically a protein digesting enzyme, or a protease. It will break down proteins. Pepsin is going to need to be in an acidic environment, needs to be mixed with stomach acid in order to work. The mucus within the stomach helps prevent the pepsin from digesting the stomach wall. The hydrochloric acid, or HCl, that's secreted by the gastric pits is going to give our stomach a pH of 2, which is quite acidic, much more acidic than Diet Coke or lemon juice. And this pH of 2 is going to activate the pepsin to turn it on, so to speak. This digestive enzyme needs to be in an acidic environment to work. This pH of 2 within the stomach also is going to kill many bacteria that are found in our food. However, some bacteria can thrive in the stomach. For example, H. pylori, also known as Heliobacter pylori, it's a specific species of bacterium that can live in the stomach and the mucosal lining of the stomach and cause gastric ulcers, or holes to form in the lining of the stomach. As we eat food, that stomach will fill up with chyme, and that chyme is capable of emptying completely into the small intestine in a period of 2 to 6 hours, depending on how much food was ingested and the content, the breakdown of that food. If the food is low in lipids, it is digested quicker or empties from the stomach quicker. If it's high in lipids, it takes a longer amount of time to be emptied from the stomach. Here are those structures we talked about with the stomach. We have first that J-shaped pocket of the stomach with its 3 alternating layers of muscle, and then lining the stomach we have a mucosal membrane with many deep folds or gastric pits, And within those gastric pits, we have gastric glands secreting the digestive or gastric juices of the stomach. Here in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, you can see an electron micrograph of gastric pits within the rugae. And in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, you can see the peristaltic or rhythmic contraction of the stomach, moving food in, down towards the bottom, and out through the bottom. Up next, we have the small intestine. Our small intestine is going to be about 6 meters or 18 feet long in an average human being. And in the small intestine, we're primarily going to have absorption and digestion. We're also going to have many accessory organs making their secretions into the small intestine. Though we are going to have our secretions from the pancreas, those enzymes from the pancreas are going to be dumped into the small intestine and will digest carbs, proteins, fats, and not mentioned, but it's worth mentioning, they will also help us digest nucleic acids as well. Bile will be secreted by the gallbladder into the small intestine as well. This bile from the gallbladder helps us to emulsify or dissolve fat in the chyme of the small intestine. It's also worth emphasizing, though, that the gallbladder does not make the bile. The gallbladder secretes the bile. A different organ makes the bile. Within the small intestine, we need to have lots of absorption. And to increase the amount of absorption, we need to have large surface areas. And we can have that large surface area by having many tiny little folds and extensions within the small intestine. We are going to have villi, which are finger-like projections off the surface of a cell. And the villi are going to be covered with microvilli. So if I go forward here, you can first see the large villi, or the large folds within the small intestine. These large folds increase surface area. And then if I zoom in on a segment of the fold, you can see a villi. And if I zoom in on a segment of this villi, you can see microvilli. So right here is a segment of the villi. If I zoom in on it, you can see many hundreds of tiny extensions called microvilli. One of the interesting factoids or bits of trivia that I like about the small intestine is that if you were able to spread out all of the microvilli, the villi, and the folds, the surface area of that 6 meter long small intestine is going to be approximately equal to a typical tennis court within an average adult. Within the small intestine, we're going to have protein monomers or amino acids and sugars enter the blood capillaries. Digested fats or digestive lipids are going to enter the lacteals, which are part of the lymphatic system. Within our small intestine, the kinds of enzymes that break apart of carbohydrates, generally speaking, are going to be amylases or maltases. And these pancreatic amylases, or the amylases, will take the complex carbs and break them into simple carbs. And then once we have those simple subunits, those simple subunits can be absorbed into the bloodstream. If we look at proteins, we are going to have proteases or protein digesting enzymes that will take the proteins, break them down into oligomers, and from oligomers into amino acid monomers, which are then absorbed into the bloodstream. And then finally, the bile will take a big glob of fat and emulsify it or dissolve it into smaller pieces. Lipase will then break down the fat into its monomers, its fatty acids, and its glycerols, and then the fat can be absorbed into a lymphatic capillary. Here is an overview of the major digestive enzymes. It's worth emphasizing that there are over 20 enzymes in the digestive system. These are the highlights. We have these amylases and maltases and lactases that are going to digest carbohydrates, and they are present in the mouth and small intestine. Generally speaking, in the mouth, we need to have enzymes that work at a neutral pH. In the small intestine, we need enzymes that work at an alkaline or basic pH. And in the stomach, we need enzymes that can work at an acidic pH. So, class, concept check. Enzymes secreted by the stomach require what kind of a pH? And what enzymes secreted by the pancreas and small intestine require a different kind of pH? So go ahead and rewind the video, check your PowerPoint, check your notes, and get me an answer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okie dokie. The correct answer is that enzymes in the stomach require an acidic pH, and from the pancreas and small intestine, those enzymes require a basic pH. So the correct answer is C, acidic and then basic. We're going to go ahead and stop our recording right now. If you have any additional questions for me about the digestive system, please go ahead and feel free to post them on the class discussion board, or shoot me an email, or stop by my office if you're on campus. Happy studies!